What's happening, hardscapers? This is episode 226 of the How to Hardscape podcast, where we talk about how you can start and grow your hardscaping business. And on today's episode, we have a I Am a Hardscaper mashup episode. This is where we take this year's I Am a Hardscaper episodes, and in those episodes, we do a deep dive into a hardscape business owner's business. And on these mashups, we take the previous year's episodes, we choose a single question and response, and we put it all into one episode to cover one single topic and have multiple different viewpoints on that topic. And so this episode features the question about how do you organize your proposal when you send it off to a client, whether that's a line item, work area proposal that you're sending out, or however you're sending it out. This is actually something that got added this year to our question list. And it largely had to do with me working on the How to Hardscape headquarters software, where I'm just trying to compile a bunch of different ways to be able to organize proposals and make it very customized for our users. If you need a software to help streamline processes in your business, from budgeting, estimating, job costing, time tracking, CRM, and so much more, just message me on Instagram at How to Hardscape. We'll get you a demo or send you over some videos that can help you learn a little bit more about the software, as well as the training courses that go along with that. That's installing interlocking concrete pavements, segmental retaining walls, and so many more courses that we have available to users. And the goal with those courses, as well as future courses on the platform, is to be able to not only use them yourself if you're just starting out, but to also assign them to your employees to help them grow within your business, whether that's labor that you want to turn into an installer, or an installer into a foreman, whatever that looks like in your business. We want to be able to allow you to do that within the software there. But along with that proposals question, we also asked the question in this episode about payment structure for a project. So what does that upfront cost look like to the client? How much percentage? What are your progress payments throughout a project? And what do you leave to that very end? These are always really insightful questions that I do like to ask in every single episode, so I hope you enjoy it. I want to say a thank you to our sponsor, Cycle CPA. If you need bookkeeping, accounting, CFO services, reach out to Cycle CPA at cycle_CPA on Instagram. Let them know How to Hardscape sent you for money off their services there. And if you are on your phone right now, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, before we get started here, leave us a rating and review. Really appreciate that. And without further ado, let's get into today's episode.
Hey, my name is Joel Johnson with Hatton Landscape, and I am a hardscaper. So we don't get super in depth as far as the breakdown, but for a proposal, like if you've got a patio with the outdoor feature and a fire pit and a bench, each one of those will be kind of line item, just so the customer can kind of gauge, like, I don't quite want to spend that much money. So it gives them, I feel like for me, it gives them a bit of control or understanding in the cost per feature. So I don't like break it down like to like excavation cost or this, like real detailed, but I will give them, sort of a somewhat broken down project. Because again, we want to be flexible with customers. I realize there's a lot of people that don't have $50,000 to spend in their backyard, but I'd still love to work for them. So that's where I think you do want to be careful, because we've had a lot of customers that will like dig and prod. Like I won't give them material costs or things that specific, but I will give them like, hey, if you want a 10-foot bar and a built-in grill, it's going to be this much.
Right.
So that they kind of give them some education on what each one of these features costs to get you to this $100,000 backyard, or whatever that is. So yeah, I think it's, again, I know some people just give it all. It's like, this is what it costs to do it, or we don't do it. That's not really my approach. I try to, best we can, work with people, especially when they're serious. But yeah, I think that's the kind of our approach to that.
And then when a client goes ahead with you, do you have a specific pricing structure in terms of this percent down, this percent midway, this percent at the end, or is it flexible in terms of the project? Just what's your thoughts on that pricing structure once you've signed up a client?
Yeah, so we'll do just like a 10% deposit to get on our schedule. So not a huge deposit, but that's like a non-refundable deposit to confirm the work. So I don't get a huge amount upfront. And then once we get into the project, normally for anything over, I'd say like 50,000, we're doing 4 draws throughout the project. So that's been good for us. So we'll get that, uh, so take 10% out, but then we'll do like 4 draws throughout the project. So the first day we're there, 25%, then, as materials arrive on site, 25%, and then kind of a benchmark throughout the project. So that's kind of how we've done it. It's worked well for us. Again, I kind of learned that from Caleb over at Almond. He had mentioned just the importance of that draw method. We used to do stuff just like 50% down and 50% at the end. But that just does not seem wise. It's just not a wise move. So I kind of like the idea of getting that money in draws throughout. Again, for a smaller, maybe $10,000 project, we'll maybe do a 50 and then 50 because we'll be in and out in a few days. But normally for those larger projects that are a few weeks or more, doing those draws, I think works best for everyone. Customer gets to see some progress, but then we're also getting paid along the way. That has worked well for us.
I am Alex Altschuler, the owner of Seal It Group. We specialize in sealing and restoration and landscape construction. I am a hardscaper. Great question. So yeah, for the sealing jobs, small jobs, we like to, to start off with, I always like to take at least a 10% deposit just to book a date. So, that just shows that the client is serious. They're going to do their job. They're not going to back out last minute, and then it doesn't conflict with our schedules. And it ensures that, we're forecasting, we're able to meet targets, and we could see how our season's going. So that's a big one. 10% off the bat just to set a date. And just before we start the job, we normally take another 40%. So that equals to 50% up front just before starting the job. And then the final the final 50% is upon job completion, upon reviewing the job together with the client, making sure they're 100% satisfied. We take that final 50%. Now this is for, small to medium jobs. Large construction jobs will take progress payments. So, we'll do the 10%, then we'll do the 40% before we start. And then, depending on how it's going, we might ask for another 20 or 30, and then it'll be like a 15% holdback. But that's only for, larger jobs, say over 40, 50K, where we need to continue, meeting our running costs and covering our costs. But for anything generally under that, it's pretty much what I explained earlier with the kind of 50-50.
Hey, my name is Alex Castelline. I am the owner-operator of Casty Landscape Group. We specialize in luxury living in the outdoors, and I am a father and owner of a lasagna company as well. And I am at first a hardscaper.
Nice. And then when it comes to actually creating a design and giving a proposal to a client, what does your proposal look like in terms of giving them a quote? Are you breaking it down by line item pricing and being very specific? Are you breaking it by work area or are you just giving a lump sum price? How do you go about building that proposal for the client?
Yeah. So, and again, it's the same thing I kind of draw on, being transparent and building that trust with clients. Is that I find that a lot of people, I don't know, I've heard this argument from so many different sides. People say if you break down your quote too much, people will start nitpicking line items or trying to find that line item for cheaper. Like, if irrigation's broken down or lighting's broken down or even broken down by fixture, they'll say, well, I can buy those lights at Lowe's for $200. Why would I pay you $200 a fixture to do the same thing? It's like, well, you're paying for the installation and the expertise that I bring to shine the light on the right plant and, to make sure it doesn't fall apart in a year and all these other things. So we do quotes by line item. And part of that is to be as transparent as possible through the quoting process and to build that trust with the client. I don't want to say, I quote a job at $100,000 and they want to make a change. The change is, could be a big or small change, and then they have no idea how that change actually changes the final cost of the job. And I've heard stories of people, they take out small things in the contract, or they take out big things and the contractor only lessens the quote by like $100, but what they took out could have been worth $1,000. And so now you're losing that trust because you're taking advantage of somebody who doesn't have the same knowledge we do. So we've always given line items that are very specific. Like here's front yard, here's your, rough grade, final grade, access prep, interlock install price, interlock stone price. If there's borders, here's what the borders cost. Here's what your inserts cost. Here's your concrete foundation cost, wall cost, coping cost. Everything is in there. So even like as far as outdoor kitchens, we'll break it down from concrete foundations, the gas lines, electrical, the wall materials, the appliances, the countertops. So like you're talking 7 line items for just one feature, where some people just have like L-shaped or even a straight, 3x8 outdoor kitchen, average stone prices, no appliances, here's $15,000. And then people go, well, I want this stone, not that stone. How does that affect the price? And then they're confused. So
excellent. Yeah, awesome. And then when it comes to progress payments or payment structure in general for a typical project, does that change from project to project, or do you have a typical amount that you take up front to schedule, an amount when you start, and what gets left till the end? Just payment structure, what does that typically look like for you?
Yeah, so we try not to. I mean, when I was very young starting my business, so well, when you have a kid who's like 17 years old asking you for money in advance, it was very hard for people to do that. And I don't know why, but I've always kind of carried the mentality even now that I find that people just, they don't trust you, they don't know you. So giving you large sums of money ahead of time is difficult for some, especially when you hear about contractors burning people and taking deposits and running. So we've tried to structure our deposit structure that we are only paid for like equal work that's being done. So our booking deposit's like 5%. Once we get a few weeks out, we need like another 10. And this just helps kind of really solidify their spot in case something happens, because if we have to fill that spot last minute, and someone bails, it's going to be hard to kind of shift timelines around, especially if you're waiting on permits for things. So we don't want to obviously be out the overhead and guys' wages if they can't work. So that's why we require that. And then, I'll look at basically all the features, the major features of the yard. So like the pool will have a payment schedule. The outdoor kitchen will be, deposit and final payment. So, in a $100,000 job, there might be like 7 progress payments, something like that. Almost 1 or 2 a week essentially, but it's always, as work is being done, there's money being paid. And it's like, in my opinion, the most fair way to do it. Some guys come in, I need 50% up front. And so they want to check for 50 grand. I don't know a single homeowner that's going to do that, especially in our industry. So, and then they'll go another 25% and then another 20, and then they only want to leave 5% on the table at the end in case the client's not happy. It's 5 grand. It's not going to be worth going and fixing anything that you messed up.
Right.
So if you're that guy. So for us, like we try to leave, the standard holdback for construction is like 10%. So we try to leave 10% on the table until at the end to make people comfortable. And obviously, there's very few issues. If there are, it's, maybe a half day's work to go in and just do the punch item list of the things they want kind of cleaned up or finished. And then that's it. And then they have no problem paying us. So
my name is Giovanni, better known as Johnny Giovanni. I'm the designer and owner of Stoneworthy, and I'm a hardscaper. No, it definitely became standardized like in the last year and a half, where we'll collect 50% prior to starting the job. Once we're at 50% completion, we require 25% plus whatever add-ons have been added to that scope of work. And then once we finish the job, and if it passes like village approval and all that, then we'd like to receive the remaining 25% plus whatever add-ons were added to that job.
Hi, I'm Scott Elam. I am the owner operator of Infinity Lawn and Landscaping, and we specialize in outdoor living spaces and landscape design. I am a hardscaper. It all changes based on the scope of the work. They can range anywhere from half down and half when we're done on like a 1-day job to 8 to 10 payments depending on the size of the job. I don't like to have too much money out there. I try to keep it down to like a 5 to 10 grand at a time range of where you're not handing the customer an invoice for $40,000 and they got, oh geez, I I got to move money or I got to sell stock or do you don't want to shock them with that. You want to give them easier payments. And if that's a payment every other day, that's just what it is. But yeah, so we have different tiers of size and scope of job and amount of payments.
And then when you're actually sending out a proposal, what do you typically structure your proposals as? Do you go by work area, line item, or just a lump sum what the actual project's going to cost?
I try to separate it out in work areas. Again, it's kind of what the customer prefers in a way. Like if I'm doing something that they might think about phasing out, I'll try to do it in work areas. If it's, hey, this is what I want, it's typically a lot. It has an itemized list of materials when we're done because you're paying for that. You pay for the drawing, you pay for the materials, you pay for the proposal. And to me, some people disagree with that, some people agree with it. I just think, hey, if I'm doing your job, you want to know what I'm putting into it. You want to know, you don't want patio 50,000. It's like, well, what is this? You get how much stone we're putting in, what kind of filter fabric we're putting in, drainage. You have an itemized list that you know what's going into your job.
My name's Jake. I'm the owner operator of JFS Property Care, and I am a hardscaper. Yeah, so it sometimes depends on the customer. Some people specifically want things line itemed. I don't go down to the nitty gritty of line iteming. Most of the time I'll do like one quote I just sent out had a patio and a fire pit, and then I had a landscaping quote that was separate, and I also had a can't remember now. I think it was a seat wall that was separate. Because sometimes like I don't know if I want a seat wall, but just could you quote me on it kind of thing. So any of the features normally I'll put as a line item just because it's also good fuel for me too. If they're like, oh, this is too much, this isn't what I was looking for. I'm like, oh, well, if you want, we could take off the fire pit and you'll save yourself X amount of dollars. That's why I like to do that because then they can kind of see the entire layout of what they're actually spending their money on. But I don't go down to like the nitty gritty of doing it by hours or anything like that. I think that's, more personal stuff for the business to know. And, it's just too much work, honestly, to put it out that way. It's a lot. So
in terms of payment structures, how do you structure your payments in terms of what you're taking up front, what you're leaving at the back end, and any progress payments? Or does that change from project to project? You kind of tailor it from project to project, but what's your kind of payment structure set up like?
Yeah, so it does vary project to project for sure. Normally what we'll do, and I'm probably going to catch a lot for this, but normally we'll do $200 up. So basically our design fee is $300, give or take. It really depends on the project. Something elaborate is going to be a lot more, but for a basic patio, and then half of that will go towards the project. So normally I'll put half the design cost towards the project just to kind of give them a little bit of, money towards it. So they're kind of more apt to go with us. And then once they say yes, they sign the proposal, we'll take a $200 deposit. And that $200 deposit will keep you on the schedule until your job comes up or until we have to buy material. And then usually we'll take 30% when we buy material and then the remainder at the end of the project, just so we're covered there. And that's for a project up to like, give or take 20 grand. Mm-hmm. Anything over that, we'll do 30 and then another 30 once we get to like a certain milestone in the project. Like once, the walls are built or the base is down and the kitchen's built, we'll take another 30 and then the remainder at the end of the project. So it really depends a little bit on it, but I know a lot of people take like, they're like, I take 10% or 20% right up front, when I book the job. And I'm like, not that I don't want to do that. I would love to do that. But as a customer, if somebody told me that, if I had a $50,000 job and they said, hey, we can do it in, November of 2023, and I've got to give them $10,000 or $20,000 right now, I'd be like, I don't know. That seems like there's a lot that can happen. What if something happens to the client or the, the guy who works there? I don't know. So that's why I don't do that. But, it's kind of here nor there. I haven't really been burned on it since. So, I'm good for now, but that may change down the line. We'll see.
I just want to take a break from today's episode to talk about our sponsor, Cycle CPA. You may have a CRM or project management software in place, but what data are you using to ensure your estimating is accurate? Having a proper accounting setup and accurate bookkeeping done is key to understanding overhead expenses and other costs that must be recouped in your estimates. Cycle CPA is a remote bookkeeping and CFO firm that helps to connect the dots from the financial reports to the hardscape and landscape data needed in order to reach high profits. They provide landscape and hardscape industry benchmarking, job costing financials by service line, advisory meetings, and much more. Cycle CPA's team of accountants are specialized within the hardscape and landscape industry, and you can visit them at cyclecpa.com, and for $200 off, mention the How to Hardscape podcast. Now back to our episode.
I'm Mark Arsenault. I'm the owner of Green Monster Landscapes in Dover, New Hampshire, specializing in hardscape and stonework, and I am a hardscaper. Yeah, I mean, there's typically some kind of breakdown. Sometimes it's more than I actually want it to be. I'm trying to get away from that a little bit, but the synced up software is also sort of driven towards work areas as well. So it's sort of like I was starting to get away from it some, and now I'm finding myself back into it, But people do like to pick and choose what they want, but some of these bigger scale things, it's like, well, you can't really do this without doing that, So an example is I just, we sold the patio for this year, but sort of on a slope. They need a little retention. They need like a 2 foot, like we could just like stack some boulders on an edge. But so I broke out patio and retaining wall. And then she didn't pick the retaining wall. And it's kind of like, that's on me. Like that was stupid. I should,
Gotcha.
We got to do it. So now I got to break it to her. It's like, well, we're still going to build a retaining wall, right? So what do you want? You want me to do the cheapest way we can so that like you can keep your budget or, but it's all, if it's a big project too, you get up into, 100, 125, 150 or more to just throw out that number like that. I think most people want to see a little bit of a breakdown, but I don't know. Every time I think I have people figure it out, I don't. So.
Gotcha. When it comes to a payment structure for projects, what are you typically, do you have a typical percentage up front, percentage progress payments, percentage at the end, or is that flexible?
Yeah, I guess flexible is a good word.
Yeah.
I'm all over the board on that sometimes. I don't know why. I'm my own worst enemy at times, but I don't like to take a lot up front. So my down payment, like usually is I'll send a proposal, they'll accept it, and it's usually like 10%. And the reason I do that is because we're always booked out so far. I always feel like if people are giving me 25, 30, 50% up front, and like this has happened. It's not just like I feel, this has happened. When they give you that much money up front, then they constantly hound you about when you're going to be there. So it's like, I don't want all your money right now. Just give me a little bit to put you on the schedule. I know that you're there and not like you're going to get your nephew to do it in the meantime. But I also don't want to be hounded every week about when we're going to be there. So to me, it's sort of like, well, I told you August and it's still August, maybe September, and when you have like, I don't know, $25,000 of theirs and you've been sitting on it for 3 months, I feel like they get antsy and they're always hounding you and pushing you to show up. So that's like a stressor I can do without. And I rather like collect the money for the work I'm actually doing. And so it's usually like 10%, and then we'll do 50%, and then ends up being the balance when we finish. That changes a little bit on the bigger jobs, where we do progress payments. We've also done larger scale projects that were T&M, where I've just gotten a draw every 3 weeks or something. So I'm just flexible with it, and I change it depending on the project.
My name is Stephen Lisk. My company is Lisk Landscape Innovations. We specialize in stormwater management, and I am a hardscaper. Yeah, anything under like $10,000 or $15,000, I'll usually do 50% down, and then 50% upon completion, because we're going to get done the job pretty quick. Whether that's a couple of days, 2-3 days. But larger projects, anything over 20 or 25K, we'll usually break it down into thirds or quarters. Always 25% down, and then usually another 25% upon 14 days prior to project start date, and then we'll do another payment 25% project midpoint, and then we'll usually do. Sometimes we break up the last two payments depending on the size of the job, but usually it's 25% upon completion.
Hey, I'm Shane Herbert. I'm the owner of Royal Stone and Masonry, and I am a hardscaper. So during COVID, I was taking deposits, from the customers just to pay for materials because the materials were limited. And I was booking out 6 months in advance. So I had pavers sat on people's driveways or people's lawns for months, because I wanted to make sure when I got to that job, I prepared myself, because I kind of had an inkling. I knew this was going to happen. I knew this situation. I always try and stay informed in the news and what's going off around the world, just so I'm better prepared for my business and better prepared for the future of the company. But from now on, all I do when we sign the contract, and I take 40% down, that's payment of materials. The materials will get delivered to you the very next day, depending if they're in stock or not. And then it's 30% when we start, and then 30% when we finish, or it gets broken down depending on how long the job is. Some of my jobs are only a week long. Some of my jobs are 2 weeks.
It's definitely specific to each project, but to start off, I would say I was horrible at it for 5 years, and it was a cash flow disaster. And if you're starting out, get a contract put together, get a lawyer to check it, stick to it, and stick to it. So what we do now, I'd say maybe 20% of our projects are time and material based. So we're just charging hourly markup on materials. Everything's open book. We bill every 2 weeks. And we're working towards an overall budget. And generally that happens when we have a very large project, like over $1 million, because a lot of times when you're quoting that project, there's a lot of unforeseen still. And I think it gives good balance to the customer. It gives good balance to us. We're not going to inflate numbers too much because there's variables. They're comfortable with working towards a budget. They might save on certain items. They have the opportunity to cut and paste a little bit as well. And then on those projects, they're working. Every time they get an invoice, they get a copy of the budget sheet, so they can see whatever change orders have come on, where they're at overall, what they've spent, what they've paid, what's left. And then our contracts, which we have really tightened up over the years. We'll have a look at what do we got to spend right away. So we got to buy the stone. We got to pay a few sub trades or give them deposits, say for a sport court, outdoor kitchen. Sometimes this stuff gets spread out over the contract, but the past 2 years we've been doing it at the beginning because order times have been such a disaster. So say it's a $500,000 job. We might need 200 to start to buy everything, buy all the product, get sub trades lined up, get in the schedule for things, whether it's to get a pool shot or order material. And then whatever's left after the deposit phase, we usually do like 25%, 50%, 75%. And then we usually leave them anywhere from 8 to 10% hammer at the end. And generally that's to be paid upon completion or owner satisfaction within 15 days. And when we're doing our draws, when we are tracking against that budget sheet and we hit the 50% mark, even if it's not a billing week, we send that to the customer. We say we'd like to get paid within 7 days, which is in the contract. It allows you to work with their money most of the project until the end. It gives you a little more hammer to make sure you're getting paid on time. I would say only twice in the past 8 or 9 years we've left a job because and don't get me wrong, we didn't get it Friday, we're gone. But if by the next Friday we haven't got it, we're probably gone. So that's only ever happened a couple of times. So for the most part, customers are good. And I think too, like we always say, if they know what they're getting, when they're getting it, and how much it costs, there should be no problems.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast episode on this mashup of business owners that we've interviewed throughout 2023. An amazing thing with that, we are hitting our 4-year anniversary in just a couple of weeks' time on this podcast. So thank you for joining with me through these 4 years. If you haven't already left a rating and review in those 4 years, I would greatly appreciate that now. That is on Apple. You can leave a 5-star rating as well as a written review, and on Spotify, just a 5-star rating. And I want to urge you also to follow each of these business owners to learn more about them. On Instagram is usually the best place. And usually their business name is the same as their Instagram handle, or check out their full episode on the podcast. You can find it throughout 2023, all of these full-length interviews, which I urge you to check if you haven't already. We want to say thank you to our sponsor, Cycle CPA. If you need bookkeeping, accounting, CFO services, reach out to Cycle CPA at cyclecpa.com. Let them know How to Hardscape sent you for $200 off their services there. And we look forward to meeting with you next week on the How to Hardscape podcast.